The National Electrical Code, or NEC, distinguishes between wiring methods based on their inherent flexibility. Wiring methods like armored cable, or AC cable, and flexible metal conduit, or flex, are designed to tolerate movement without sustaining damage. Romex, which is non-metallic sheathed cable, possesses less flexibility and may suffer damage if subjected to excessive movement. The exception provided for flexible wiring methods permits support within 12 inches of the terminal connection point. This allowance is granted because the wire's flexibility enables movement without imposing undue stress on the connection. Conversely, Romex lacks this exception due to its limited flexibility, which could lead to damage if supported too closely to the terminal. While it is not mandatory to employ a wiring method with the aforementioned exception for dishwashers, it remains crucial to securely fasten the Romex cable within 12 inches of the dishwasher's terminal. This can be achieved through the utilization of a cable clamp or another approved method. In addition to securement, the NEC mandates protection against physical damage for dishwasher cables. This can be accomplished by encasing the cable within a conduit or employing a cable protector. It is essential to select the appropriate cable type for dishwasher applications. Romex stands as the prevalent choice for dishwashers. However, verifying the cable's amperage rating to match the dishwasher's requirements is paramount. For individuals with reservations about electrical work, engaging a qualified electrician for dishwasher installation is advisable. The NEC addresses cable support in Article 334.30 specifically for non-metallic sheathed cable, or Romex. This section mandates that non-metallic sheathed cable be supported and secured by staples, cable ties, straps, hangers, or similar fittings designed and installed in a manner that does not damage the cable. Furthermore, the cable must be secured within 12 inches of every cabinet, box, fitting, or other cable termination. Distances between supports should not exceed 4½ feet. There are exceptions to these requirements. One exception is in unfinished basements and crawl spaces, where cables sized 8-2 or 6-3 or larger are permitted to be attached directly to the bottom of the floor joists where they pass over these joists. Cables can be supported in this manner. Another exception applies to short runs. If the cable length does not exceed 3 feet and the cable is protected from physical damage, it may not need to be secured. Article 320.30 covers armored cable, or AC. It requires AC cable to be secured by approved staples, straps, hangers, or similar fittings designed and installed so as not to damage the cable at intervals not exceeding 4½ feet and within 12 inches from every outlet box, fitting, junction box, cabinet, or fitting. There are exceptions to this rule as well. One such exception allows that where cables are fished between access points, there is no requirement for support. Another exception is for lengths not exceeding 2 feet at terminals where flexibility is required. For flexible metal conduit, Article 348.30 outlines support requirements. Flexible metal conduit must be securely fastened by an approved means at intervals not exceeding 4½ feet and within 12 inches on each side of every outlet box, junction box, cabinet, fitting, or terminal fitting. Exceptions to this requirement exist. One exception permits flexible metal conduit to be unsupported where fished between access points through concealed spaces in finished buildings or structures and supporting is impracticable. Another exception allows for lengths not exceeding 3 feet at terminals where flexibility is required. Flexible metal conduit, or FMC, is commonly used for connecting dishwashers because it offers both flexibility and protection for the conductors. The NEC permits the use of FMC in lengths not exceeding 6 feet without any additional support if it meets specific conditions. These conditions include the conduit being terminated in fittings listed for the application, the cable being used in accessible locations only, and the ampacity of the conductors inside being protected at 20 amps or less. When installing Romex for dishwasher connection, you should adhere to the support requirements outlined in NEC 334.30. This typically involves securing the cable within 12 inches of the junction box using cable staples or straps. When running Romex, it should be protected from physical damage and installed in a neat and workmanlike manner. If flexibility is a concern or if the installation environment might expose the cable to physical damage, consider using FMC instead. In situations where flexibility is crucial, such as connecting to a dishwasher motor, using FMC can be advantageous. It allows for easier maintenance and replacement of the appliance without disturbing the wiring. When using FMC, ensure that the fittings used are properly listed and installed. Also, make sure the length of the FMC run does not exceed the limitations specified in the NEC for unsupported lengths, unless additional support is provided. Choosing the right wiring method depends on several factors, including the specific requirements of the appliance, the installation environment, and local codes. While Romex is commonly used, FMC offers additional flexibility and protection, which may be necessary in certain situations. The NEC provides guidelines for the proper installation and support of various wiring methods, including Romex, AC cable, and FMC. It is important to follow these guidelines to ensure safe and compliant electrical installation. The flexibility exception mentioned in the NEC applies to wiring methods like AC cable and FMC because these types of conduits are designed to bend and move without causing damage to the conductors inside. Romex, on the other hand, is not as flexible and can be damaged if bent excessively or subjected to frequent movement. For dishwasher connections, either Romex or FMC can be used, depending on the specific installation requirement. If Romex is used, it must be properly supported and protected from physical damage. If FMC is used, it offers more flexibility and protection, but it must also be installed in accordance with the NEC guidelines. The question of whether zip tying Romex to the discharge hose meets the NEC requirement for securing the cable within 12 inches of the junction box is generally no. Zip ties alone may not provide adequate support and protection for the cable. The NEC requires that cables be secured in a manner that does not damage the cable. Cable staples or straps are typically used to provide secure and proper support. In addition to support requirements, the NEC also addresses the protection of cables from physical damage. This can be achieved by routing the cable in a location where it is not likely to be damaged or by using a protective covering, such as conduit. When selecting a wiring method for a dishwasher connection, consider the following factors. Firstly, the amperage rating of the dishwasher. Make sure the cable is rated for the amperage of the dishwasher. Secondly, the flexibility requirements. If flexibility is needed, use FMC instead of Romex. Thirdly, the protection from physical damage. Protect the cable from physical damage by routing it in a safe location or by using a protective covering. Fourthly, the local codes. Comply with all local codes and regulations. To summarize, the NEC distinguishes between wiring methods based on their flexibility and support requirements. For dishwasher connections, both Romex and FMC can be used, but each must be installed in accordance with the NEC guidelines. Zip tying Romex to the discharge hose is not an acceptable method of support. Instead, use cable staples or straps to secure the cable within 12 inches of the junction box. Always prioritize safety and compliance with the NEC when performing electrical work. When connecting a dishwasher with Romex, you must ensure that the cable is properly secured and supported to prevent damage and ensure safety. The NEC mandates that Romex or non-metallic sheath cable be secured within 12 inches of any box, cabinet, or fitting. This requirement is in place to prevent strain on the connections and to protect the cable from physical damage. Zip tying the Romex to the discharge hose typically does not meet this requirement. While it might provide some level of support, it is not a recognized or approved method for securing electrical cables. The NEC requires the use of approved staples, straps, or other fittings designed for securing Romex. These fittings ensure that the cable is held firmly in place without causing damage to the outer sheathing. Approved staples or straps should be used to secure the Romex to a solid surface, such as a wooden cabinet frame or a dedicated cable support. The spacing between supports should also comply with the NEC guidelines, typically not exceeding 4 1/2 feet. It is important to avoid over-tightening the staples or straps, as this can damage the cable and potentially create a safety hazard. When routing the Romex, ensure that it is protected from physical damage. Avoid running it in areas where it could be easily snagged, crushed, or otherwise damaged. If necessary, use a conduit or other protective measure to shield the cable. The connection at the dishwasher itself should be made inside an approved junction box. This box provides a safe enclosure for the electrical connections and protects them from moisture and other environmental factors. Use appropriate wire connectors to make the connections inside the junction box, ensuring that all connections are tight and secure. Grounding is also a critical aspect of dishwasher wiring. The dishwasher must be properly grounded to prevent electrical shock hazards. Ensure that the grounding conductor is connected to the grounding terminal and the junction box and to the dishwasher's grounding point. If you are not comfortable working with electricity, it is always best to hire a qualified electrician to handle the dishwasher wiring. Electrical work can be dangerous if not done properly, and it is important to ensure that all connections are safe and compliant with the NEC and local codes. Using the correct wiring methods and securing them properly is essential for a safe and reliable dishwasher installation. Always follow the NEC guidelines and use approved materials and techniques. In summary, zip tying Romex to the discharge hose does not meet the NEC requirement for securing electrical cables. Use approved staples, straps, or other fittings to secure the cable within 12 inches of the junction box and follow all other applicable NEC guidelines for safe and compliant wiring. Understanding the differences between wiring methods is crucial for ensuring safe and compliant electrical installations. The NEC provides specific guidelines for various types of cables and conduits, taking into account their flexibility, durability, and intended applications. Armored cable, or AC, flexible metal conduit, or FMC, and other flexible wiring methods are designed to bend and move without damaging the conductors inside. This flexibility is particularly useful in situations where the wiring needs to be routed around obstacles or where there is a risk of movement or vibration. The NEC recognizes this inherent flexibility by allowing longer unsupported lengths for these types of wiring methods in certain situations. For example, at terminals where flexibility is required, AC cable and FMC can be unsupported for lengths up to a certain limit, typically 2 to 3 feet. This exception allows for easier connections and maintenance without compromising safety. On the other hand, Romex, or non-metallic sheath cable, and other rigid wiring methods are not designed to be bent or moved excessively. Bending Romex too sharply can damage the insulation and create a safety hazard. Therefore, the NEC requires more frequent support for Romex to prevent strain on the cable and connections. Romex must be supported within 12 inches of any box, cabinet, or fitting, and at intervals not exceeding 4.5 feet along its run. There is no exception for unsupported lengths at terminals for Romex, as there is for flexible wiring methods. The reason for these differences lies in the construction and properties of the wiring methods. Flexible wiring methods have a protective outer layer that allows them to bend without damaging the conductors inside. Romex, on the other hand, has a relatively thin outer sheathing that is not as resistant to bending and flexing. When choosing a wiring method for a particular application, it is important to consider the specific requirements of the installation. If flexibility is needed, a flexible wiring method like AC cable or FMC is a good choice. If flexibility is not a major concern and the wiring can be run in a straight line, Romex may be a more economical option. In the case of dishwashers, the connection to the motor and other components often requires some degree of flexibility. Therefore, using FMC for the final connection is a common practice. The FMC provides both flexibility and protection for the conductors. However, it is also permissible to use Romex for the entire run, as long as it is properly supported and protected from physical damage. It is essential to follow the NEC guidelines for the specific wiring method used to ensure a safe and compliant installation. This includes using approved fittings, securing the cable properly, and protecting it from physical damage. If you are unsure about which wiring method to use or how to install it properly, it is always best to consult with a qualified electrician. Electrical work can be dangerous if not done correctly, and it is important to ensure that all connections are safe and compliant with NEC and local codes. The NEC requirements for supporting and securing cables are designed to prevent strain on connections, protect cables from physical damage, and ensure a safe and reliable electrical system. Different wiring methods have different support requirements based on their flexibility, durability, and intended applications. Understanding these differences is essential for making informed decisions and ensuring compliance with the NEC. Firstly, non-metallic sheathed cable, or Romex, is commonly used in residential wiring. It must be supported within 12 inches of any box, cabinet, or fitting, and at intervals not exceeding 4½ feet. There is no exception for unsupported lengths at terminals. Secondly, armored cable, or AC, is often used in commercial and industrial applications. It must be supported at intervals not exceeding 4½ feet and within 12 inches of any box, cabinet, or fitting. However, there is an exception for unsupported lengths not exceeding 2 feet at terminals where flexibility is required. Thirdly, flexible metal conduit, or FMC, is used in a variety of applications where flexibility is needed. It must be supported at intervals not exceeding 4½ feet and within 12 inches of any box, cabinet, or fitting. There is an exception for unsupported lengths not exceeding 3 feet at terminals where flexibility is required. The NEC also addresses the use of cable ties for supporting cables. Cable ties are permitted to be used for supporting cables, provided that they are listed and identified for the purpose. However, cable ties should not be used as the primary means of support for cables that are subject to strain or physical damage. When using cable ties, it is important to ensure that they are properly tightened and that they do not damage the cable. Over-tightening cable ties can compress the insulation and create a safety hazard. In addition to the support requirements, the NEC also addresses the protection of cables from physical damage. Cables should be routed in a location where they are not likely to be damaged, or they should be protected by a conduit or other protective measure. When running cables through walls or floors, they should be protected by a sleeve or bushing to prevent abrasion. It is also important to avoid running cables in areas where they could be exposed to moisture, chemicals, or other corrosive substances. The NEC provides detailed guidelines for the proper installation and support of various wiring methods. It is essential to follow these guidelines to ensure a safe and compliant electrical system. If you are unsure about any aspect of electrical wiring, it is always best to consult with a qualified electrician. They can help you choose the right wiring method for your application and ensure that it is installed safely and in compliance with the NEC and local codes.